festivals, they were a place to exhibit and to show films from all over the world. Very often they compare themselves to sort of universal exhibitions for cinema. And of course, they were interested to promote cinema of their own countries where the festival is presented, but to show the diversity of the world with different viewpoints and ideas behind it. Of course, there's a sort of soft diplomacy connected to festivals, but rapidly on, even though there's this idea of soft diplomacy, there's also idea to support cinematography that have less opportunities to be shown. So that's why festivals, especially in the 60s, 70s, communist times, were looking for voices which were not like the official voices, that were not benefiting from the, let's say, traditional area of support of the different regimes. And that's why, for example, in Cannes, developed several side sections which were really championing these filmmakers. Why I'm talking about that is because other festivals, being in touch with filmmakers from Brazil, from China, from Japan, talking with them, they realize that basically these filmmakers need support, especially from countries where either because of political reasons or lack of cultural policy, these filmmakers were pretty left on their own. Cannes is a very official festival, but other festivals like Rotterdam, and I will talk about it, they were created by film buff, people who love cinema, and listening to filmmakers, they understood that, for example, in many countries, when you start a film, people have to have different jobs, and they basically cannot even invest any time for their film. So they had the idea to, okay, why not to give a little bit of money to these people? And a name that you will find and we'll talk about, Hubert Bals, who is the founder of Rotterdam Film Festival, tried to convince in Netherlands people of the country to give a little bit of money to filmmakers, talented ones. And this is basically one of the few cases of fund associated with festivals in the mid-late 80s. And this we see 35 years later that this role still continues. A week or 2 weeks ago, there was a new round of filmmakers supported with the so-called Hubert Bals Fund, still giving money to films at early stage. Now they realize that filmmakers need other stage to be supported. And basically, little by little, all festivals realize that they need to not only they want, but they need to get active and to support the filmmakers. Of course, to create markets, but also to be close to the creative process. And at the beginning, they didn't really know how to do that because that's not really their specialty, and they didn't want to take the place of producers. The idea is not really to be producers, but to support on the side. And so I talk about the pioneering aspect of Rotterdam. Another initiative I will talk about that starts now 20 years ago is a sort of residency for filmmakers organized by Cannes called Ciné Fondation. And this is very much the legacy of another tradition regarding artists, the tradition of kings and so on, to support painters and the residencies, to go in another country to basically get inspired. And this applied to filmmakers. So Cannes, for example, did it in a very elitist way with very few people selected. And as you have as many festivals as cheese in France, and as personality, everybody has their own DNA, let's say. And for example, Berlinale, the Festival of Berlin, is a festival that was created in a divided city in communist times with the idea to be democratic, to be in a big city, unlike the older festivals that were usually at the seaside, for rich people holidays. Berlin is a city festival. So basically they started to develop activities that look like who they are. The previous director of Berlinale started the so-called Berlinale Talent Campus that became after Berlinale Talent. Yeah. And it's more democratic because in a way it was inviting every year 350 filmmakers from all over the world to enjoy the festival, let's say. And that's where I come now, is that in this panorama of diverse initiatives, when you just start to make short films or just finish a school or still in a school, you might be a bit lost with all of that. And there are opportunities, but you also have to understand where they come from and to have a critical point of view on them, because they can be very supportive. You need to find the place or the places that fit what you want to do. Now I will start to share with you some slides. So I will share my screen. Lab, markets and festival and panorama. I would like to give you a sense of the big festivals, but now I mentioned the ones that are really important and are crucial for international career. And there are 7 main ones in Europe. Well, as we are not in the same room, it will be less interactive, so I will go through them myself.
Great.
Go through them according to the time of the year they take place. So there's International Film Festival Rotterdam. Well, funnily enough, many of them have animals as symbols.
Yeah.
Berlinale, which is in February. The Cannes Film Festival. Karlovy, which is soon, early July. Locarno Film Festival and Venice, I mentioned already, and San Sebastian. So these are the main ones in Europe. Most of them, they were created either before the World War II or after the World War II as this idea of very official I mentioned about, or they were created a bit later by film buff like Rotterdam, so it will have its 50th edition. Berlinale, it was the 70th edition, and it was the last big festival to take place before the COVID. Cannes next edition will be next May. Karlovy also next July because it's postponed, and Locarno in August. Venice and San Sebastian might be the 2 first ones that will take place physically this time. So among these 7 festivals, actually the biggest budget is the one of Berlinale, which is 26 million euros. And you can see that a bit more than a third come from public support. Cannes, strangely, maybe to some of you, has a smaller budget than Berlin. So basically, between the French state and the region and the city, 10 million euros are invested in Cannes. And this is a great investment for a public entity because the return, and this is the highest of all the festival you will find, it cannot be in any other places. You spend €1 and you get back 20 euros. Basically, they see that the impact for Cannes of the festival is 197 million euros every year. You have a festival like Locarno with the budget which is a quite substantial one. Rotterdam, San Sebastian, which also did a study on what was the impact, and they see that the impact is quite important. I mentioned all of this because I think it's especially relevant in Azerbaijan, but it's relevant in many countries, that culture and cinema is seen mostly as a cost and as a burden for the economy of a country. And the reality is that it does generate incomes. So in San Sebastian, is like more than twice of incomes and expenses. And Karlovy is like this budget. Something I put into a form of a quiz as well, which festival has the largest audience, because to understand there are 2 or 3 kinds of festivals inside these big festivals. There's the ones which rely on a big audience because they take place in a big city or because they are open to the audience. And there are the ones who are limited to the professionals, the industry, and you have some which are a mix of the two. Actually, there's only one which is strictly for the industry, even though they accept local people to attend some screenings. It's the Cannes Festival. And all the others are kind of a mix. But the largest audience is Berlinale. Rotterdam is almost as big a festival as Berlin in terms of audience. And San Sebastian is also something which is not necessarily known, but it's quite a big audience festival, especially in regarding of the small size of the city. You have also Locarno and Karlovy Vary. What is important when you have your films is that people talk about it, and especially journalists, and that's why it's important to know what you can expect, because maybe the moment of festivals is one of the rare moments when journalists will talk things a little bit outside of the usual, the mainstream, and they might talk about an Azeri film when the rest of the year they will probably not talk about an Azeri film. The festival with most journalists is Cannes, with as many as 5,000 journalists, making it the most mediatized annual event in the world. So more than anything else, it's where you have the most media coverage. The only event with more media coverage is the Olympic Games, but the Olympic Games takes place only once every 4 years. So that's what makes Cannes really unique. And among these 5,000 journalists, they are from all over the world. Berlin has also many journalists, but I would say the proportion of German journalists is higher than the proportion of French journalists in Cannes. Venice is one of the clear assets of Venice is their capacity to attract journalists, even though you see it's twice lower than Berlin and almost 3 times lower than Cannes. San Sebastian has quite many journalists after the big three, because usually we call Cannes, Berlin, and Venice the big three. And it's something that is not necessarily known, that there are more media coverage in San Sebastian than Locarno or Karlovy Vary. So industry, it's not a beautiful word, but it represents everything which has to do with the life, the economic life, or the creative, the films into the making, whereas in development, in the selling them. Well, again, the biggest one is Cannes, and this year is a bit particular because there's this online market that it's only on the second day, so I'm not going to comment on it because there should be an evaluation from it. But usually in normal times, then there are more than 38,000 people who go to the market and to the festival, and more than 10,000 only for the market. Numbers of Berlinale are not too far, but they are quite smaller, which makes me to say, and not only me, but many people in the industry, that Cannes and Berlin are the only market for cinema in Europe. Because for me, I look at a strict definition of a market. A market is a place where you sell or you buy a product. And after these two, that's why for me it's now we say Venice, Cannes, Berlin, the big three, but actually now it's really in Europe the big two, Berlin and Cannes, because after, in terms of industry, the third biggest is San Sebastian, which is again doesn't really necessarily fit to what people believe. There are some visions of festivals that don't necessarily fit with the reality, but San Sebastian is a very active festival. Venice, there are less, and Karlovy Vary has quite a substantial industry, and I think it's interesting for Azeri filmmakers because Karlovy Vary is very open to films from Azerbaijan, so it's definitely a good place to have your films shown, because it's a festival with audience, but also with a festival with industry. For example, Locarno has much less industry than Karlovy Vary or San Sebastian, and I'm sure that in the profession, even many industry people are not aware of that. Karlovy Vary or San Sebastian are bigger industry-wise than Locarno. And I already answered the question about which festivals has the biggest growth. I mean, in terms of number of people coming, this is San Sebastian, because in the last 10 years, there was almost 50% of increase. And it's also because the festival managed to really carve out its identity in terms of what it wants to do to support films and filmmakers. I will go a little bit quicker on festivals from North America and from Asia because with few exceptions, it's very unlikely for you as a filmmakers that this festival will be your entry points into the international cinema because let's say they are less open than European festivals to international activities. But nevertheless, Sundance is obviously an important one in January. Then you have Tribeca in April, which takes place in New York. And then you have Toronto in September. And Toronto is, together with Berlin and Cannes, is really the third market in the world which is associated to a festival. That's a very important place, especially for North American films, but not only. That's why if you have a film that you're looking for festivals in September, that's why it's good to go to Toronto if you can, together with San Sebastian or with Venice. In Asia, which is technically where Azerbaijan is, you have a big one in Shanghai in June, but the main festival for Asia is Busan in Korea in beginning of October. And you have what I would say a rising festival in December in Singapore. Now I will talk more about market and labs. So basically, I did make a selection to what exists because not every day, but every year you have new initiatives and not everything is relevant to talk about. Not everything is relevant for you to know about, but this is a maybe indication of what could exist. And you see, even if I'm myself critical about the word market, I even use it myself because that's something practical that everybody says, okay, in which market? But usually what I mean by platforms and markets is a place of visibility and networking, basically, which helps to create partnerships, to get notice. And they are very often the same format. They do have a selection, a lineup, in the same way that a festival with Finnish films have a lineup, but they have a lineup of films that are projects, and they have different criteria. Some of them would ask already financing in place, some will not ask financing, some will be for films at editing stage, and this time we call them work in progress. But usually these are events with a catalog with 15 to 20 films shown, sometimes more. It's very often that when you make a film, you go to at least 2 or 3 of these platforms. And it's important to know when you should start to look for it and not to have too many and to have a strategy of timing. So you need to have a strategy of timing to understand when it will be the most relevant. For example, if you go to a platform and if on the basis of few information your project is selected, but as a producer, if you know that your scriptwriter will not deliver a script to share with other people before 1 year, it doesn't make too much sense to go to a platform because maybe you will receive attention, but you cannot accumulate from the discussions because you will make people wait for more information too long. So maybe people have interest. When I mean people, it could be usually producers from other countries, or it could be festivals or film fans. And usually they want to read a script or distributor a few weeks after the event. So you need to define when you are going to apply. So the very first event, which was created in line with what I said about the founder of Überbals, of the festival, Cinemart. From its name itself, you can see that it's positioned really for cinema as a market, but an artistic one. And it has a very good selection. It's during the festival, and every year it's 16, 20 projects. For all of you, basically, I think you should take notes. And after the lecture, if you know or if you don't know these places, you should go to their website to download the catalogs in PDF of the last editions to understand what kind of films they select, if you are in line with their profile. And the profile is something that sometimes is defined by a geographical scope, like Sarajevo has a scope for film from Southeast Europe, but Cinemat doesn't have a geographical scope. So you need to understand the logics of their selection to see if you have the right film for it, not to lose your time, because in all this environment, you will have many negative answers, and the idea is to limit the negative answers. So to limit that, you need to knock on the door at the right time and on the right door. Another important platform is the Berlinale co-production market, which is again a selection of projects. It's pretty rare for Azeri films because Berlinale, compared to Rotterdam, position itself for bigger budgets, even in the field of art house. You have another platform which is associated to the Festival of Cannes called Ciné Fondation. I do believe there were a couple of Azeri projects in the past. So this Ciné Fondation has a profile of really looking at the originality of the directors and for the possibility to have a French co-producer attached. So this is a deadline, now the dates for the next events. If you want to apply, I think you need to wake up 6 months before the date. So if you don't tell yourself like, I don't know, Venice is in 2 months, I will present my project. No, it's too late already. You have to look at 5 to 6 months ahead. Here I made a list of places and I included the ones which are more Azerbaijan friendly. Mm-hmm. There's one which are not Azerbaijan friendly, not because they don't like Azeri people, but because of their profile they created to distinguish themselves. For example, Locarno's has something called Open Doors, but every 3 years they change focus, and right now it's Southeast Asia, so it's not Azerbaijan. Mm-hmm. Mia of Rome. So this is an example of a pure market. There are not so many in Europe. In the US, there's one in Los Angeles, American film market. In Rome, there's Mia. In San Sebastian, it's mostly for between Latin America and Europe, so it's not really a place for Azerbaijan. Les Arcs could be, because they are for European project, and I think they have a large understanding of European project, and including Azerbaijan. And now I will talk about the labs. So labs, it's something generic. I think it comes from the idea of a research and development, like it should be the place where the film industry research for new forms of filmmaking. So that's why it has given this name. But I think a little bit like the term market, in many cases, the wording labs is really exaggerated for what the initiative is. I think a lab is something very, very ambitious as a term, but many of the labs are usually just getting a couple of advice from a couple of people in a short amount of time. It doesn't have to be big stuff. So very different initiatives that have different realities and scope behind them. And also they target different kind of people. So for the producers among you, I shortlisted 7 of them. 2 of them are for all kind of profile, IABE and ACE. ACE is people from a bit more experience. Atelier Ludwigsburg, Paris is a sort of master of 1 year between 2 film schools in Germany and France, but they do welcome young producers from other parts of Europe. Something interesting for the people who make documentaries is a program Emerging Producers, which is organized by Ildə Film Festival in Czech Republic. For the people quite experienced, I don't think there's more than 2 or 3 in Azerbaijan, but that could go to this profile is Inside Pictures. It's a project, it's a program for experienced producers who want to train themselves. Generally, this is the idea that the labs, you don't go there when you have a problem or when you don't know enough. It's kind of a lifelong learning process in a way, or networking process. Eurodoc is for documentary as well, and C Animation I mentioned before. It's for animation producers. I would like to take more in focus IABE as an example that have a program of 1 year with 3 sessions, and the deadline for next year is September. I know that there were Azeri participants in the past, often the profile of director producers, yep. which is also a challenge or the issue that I'm sure your program will tackle, that the need for national cinemas to make emerge producers who do this function, this role as a work on its own, because it's a very rich and diverse role. I mean, you will have a masterclass by Natalia Drojd, so she will be able to explain, but it's very important to understand that producers are not only people who bring money or people who manage the shooting, but they are very much involved creatively and in all aspects of making the film. So there's also labs for more like topical ones. Post lab is for post-production as well as deep digital production challenge. If there are people amongst you who have more profile of coming from law or finances, Erich Pommer Institute in Germany provides trainings for in relationship with audiovisual law or these kind of aspects. Berlinale Talent, I mentioned, it's a kind of a big campus, and as it's more likely that some of you will participate, I mention it as well. The application will be deadline is usually August, and the next one will be mid-February. And inside this big talent, there's some sub-programs, depending if you are an actor, a sound engineer, an editor, a producer, a scriptwriter, documentary filmmaker. So you can, inside the big program, apply to some sub-programs. When there's an idea of lab, we could see that sometimes it's connected to your function, your specialty, but very often people have the idea of a lab to develop a project. So I mentioned several of them here. Some are for series, like Serial Eyes. Some are for documentary, like Exoriente. Many of these labs are supported by Creative Europe. Creative Europe is a program of the European Union. You can have an overview of what exists. I would say that there's probably something between 35 and 40, which covers all the field of animation, documentary, fiction, and different stage. But I would like to mention especially Less is More, which is a program to develop the writing of a film at a limited budget. Every year there are 16 projects supported. Again, they do, it's mostly for European Union project, but they do keep open position, at least 20% of them, for non-European Union participants. So you can definitely apply. The next deadline will be in October. And something which is a little bit on the side of labs is the residencies, which is basically places to stay in order to, most of the time it's about to write a script. Some of them are developed by festival, like Cine Fondation, I mentioned. One of them here I mentioned is the one I created with colleague filmmakers. The last one on the page is Ikumeria Beriak, is organized by the San Sebastian Festival. For example, here they didn't update their website, so I don't know when is the next deadline. This was the last deadline, but usually it's every 6 months. In Paris, they host 6 filmmakers. It's usually people who had already some recognitions among international festivals. So basically, if you made a couple of short films, but that didn't travel too much, it's not really the place to go. So it's also important for you in your career, the place not to go, because it's no point, except if you are masochistic and you like to get a lot of no. It's better not to lose time applying in some places. So this is the one I run, which is special in the sense that it's only one filmmaker at a time, and there's no call for applications, but we do provide awards for residency in partnership with different platforms. So basically, some of the platforms I mentioned before, we agreed that one project will receive a pop-up film residency. So we put ourselves in cooperation with existing initiatives. So basically that's it for now, for this presentation, but I do hope you have questions.
What if, for example, your first feature film is, say, co-directed, and then you have a second feature film? Does the first one also count as because depending on each festival, I mean, I've had different feedback regarding what is considered like a first film. Is that, for example, what's the case? If, for example, you co-directed your first and maybe even second film, and then, it's your first.
I think this question, even though specific, it goes into the field of rules and exceptions to the rules, because very often the institutions themselves, they set up rules for different reasons, and but basically they want to support filmmakers, so sometimes they get trapped by their own rules. the rules were created to be to distinguish themselves from others, and also to as a filter. For example, in the Critics Week, we connected to your question, we very often had the issue for ourselves. We had very often people who directed three documentaries, and it will be their first fiction. Are they eligible or not? And basically, just for the Critics Week, the answer was we are going to consider a feature film, a film that was released theatrically. So at the time, it was an idea that if you made a TV documentary, it doesn't really count. But nowadays, you know, this kind of things are changing, because documentaries have been released more often in cinema. So it's more likely that you already made several films released. Basically, it's to understand how emerging is a director. And I think it's the same with co-directors. From what I know, people who are co-directing, if there are two, it's already considered as a first and a second film. Also, if you are a scriptwriter, if you wrote already 4 scripts, but none of them were produced, you are still considered as an emerging scriptwriter. For festivals for short films, it's slightly different than for feature films, because short films have a longer career in festivals. They have, usually it's admitted that they have 2 years if they work well. So basically, the crucial importance of where it will premiere is not it's crucial, but it's not as crucial as for feature films. Because you can have a film premiering locally in your country, and still a big festival can want to take it internationally. I think the problem is a question of energy and being in stress or depressed because you get negative answer and not understanding why. Because what happened when you made a short film, and let's say that you show it to people you trust, and they already say, oh, you have something, and they didn't say that only to please you, but because they truly believe it. So because you need to be able to assess yourself a little bit, you know. One thing is good to make a short film, but if it's a path towards a better film, and it doesn't necessarily need that you need to go to festivals. But if you have really a good short film in the end, what can happen quite bad is that you send it to 10 festivals and all of them say no, and you say, okay, it didn't work with this festival, I will stop because nobody wants my film, I don't understand. And this can happen to pretty good films, because even though the festivals of shorts, they do watch the films and they do make a selection, if you are not introduced somehow, and that's why I mentioned the idea of the labs as a sort of a filter, it's a little bit more difficult for the programmers, because to understand that each film needs to be introduced to understand what could be the right context to show it, and basically you need to help the programmers to make this choice. And you need to, I would recommend to be personal and to be specific. When you are in Azerbaijan, you don't necessarily have the possibility to attend 10 festivals to see how it looks like, but you have something which is, you have a much more content online than even 15 years ago. So it's a matter of research before reaching to people. A little bit like these labs, don't apply to Cine Fondation if it's not the right time. So do apply to some festivals because you believe there are good reasons for that, and also communicate about these reasons. Of course, it doesn't have to be shallow. It doesn't have to be, I don't know, but either connected to your film or to where you come from. I do believe that you you have to research, and also you need to look at the next steps, because you need to have a B plan, a C plan. It's like when you finance, you need to have your ideal plan, but then you need to not to give up and go to start the B plan if the A plan didn't work out. So basically, I wouldn't advise to apply to Cannes and to wait for 3 months if they say yes or no, because 90%, 99% chance they will say no. So apply to Cannes, but at the same time apply to other ones which take place just after, and to other ones, apply to local one, to specialized one, to international ones. And you might not want to do it for each of your short film, but I think that to understand the landscape, is good to do it with maybe your first film that you feel is really strong enough to interest people internationally.
Anna Gutkova, during her master's class, said that each minute there are 300,000 hours of content being uploaded on YouTube. So in the times that we live in, when there is like so much content and so many films, including shorts and features and documentaries and animation films, that these sort of labs and residency programs, the reason why you focused on them is because they sort of help the programmers filter this content, let's put it this way, and it helps the other way around. It helps the directors and the producers and the creators of that content to sort of get exposure, right? So I assume that like the logical thing would be not to just make your film and send it to Cannes, being like, okay, well, you know, maybe I'll get lucky and they'll pick me. But it is to maximize their exposure through participation in these labs. And moreover, that not all of those labs and residencies are suitable for let's say, an Azeri film. So
yes, I mean, you're right, but as much as I was critical sometimes about the over importance of these labs, I mean, I shouldn't neglect an obvious element of them, which is the reason why they exist. Is not only, I mean, the exposure and the filter things, it's something which goes together with it and has been given a lot of importance. But basically, if you go to a lab just for the exposure, you're not in the good mind frame, because ultimately a lab, if it's a good lab, it's really supposed to help you brainstorm, to agitate ideas, new ideas, to accelerate the creative process. So a lab is not a place you go because you have a problem with your film, but it's a place you go because you really want to
make it better,
to accelerate, to bring new ideas. And so you have to know when you are comfortable to exchange. So also in the same way, you need to know when you are comfortable to go to a platform, you need to know when you are comfortable to go to a lab. It really depends on your view and your tradition, how you were brought up in terms of what does it mean artistic content as a sole criteria. If you are essentialist person, if you are a believer of religion or something, and if you believe that creativity was given by God to you as a gift, is different than if you view it differently. If you view as me like taste and artistic achievement is a socially, historically constructed matter. You know, like many festival directors, they kind of use it as a pretext, as an excuse, artistic criteria artistic criteria to not to face the reasons behind their choices, because I don't believe that when there are so many films, I mean, it's a game to put some price and so on, but the criteria will always be different depending on the people. So basically a jury or community is always a combination of different views at a certain time. So basically I don't even believe that about the fact of artistic criteria, because people like Cannes festival director and Venice festival director, for example, they always use this example to justify why there was not this film or that film. And so how do they explain that there are so many French films, so many Italian films in Cannes and Venice? It's not artistic criteria, it's because there are some reasons which there's nothing to be ashamed of, but to be understood that there are platforms to support a national industry, and therefore they need to show Italian or French films. So definitely there are political motives, but again, I would not call it political motives, because there's nothing political in having more French or Italian films. It's just what goes together with such an event. But then, if we are really talking about political things, it's true that the zeitgeist, what is being talked about at the moment, the trends, do have an impact on why selecting a film rather than another film. There are some things which are, there are some films which are not really in the trend, and because they are not in the trend, there are less chances for most of the festivals. But maybe some programmers will actually like the fact that they are timeless. So it's, you know, you never know. I think that you either go with a film yourself, you're selected, or you can also go without films. And definitely, maybe that's your mission, you as a not only organizer of lab, even though the participant of your lab shouldn't rely too much on organization like you, but they should have their own initiatives. But definitely to organize Azeri delegation in Sarajevo is a good idea, as well as it's a good idea to go to Karlovy, which has also open to Caucasus, Turkish short films. There's I mentioned Istanbul and Bugazici and Antalya. There's Festival on Wheels. For example, in what I would not advise, if you just want to feel the vibe and everything, is to go to Cannes, for example. Or to Cannes or Venice or San Sebastian. It's too expensive, and but if you are a producer or director who already had several films, why not to go to San Sebastian? It's a great festival. Or why not to go to well, in France, definitely the two top for me is Critics Week of Cannes, because it's really the place of emerging filmmakers. There's no match. There's really the best place. And I'm not saying this because I work for it, but it is. And you can see the track record of the last 10 years. And also another festival which has really a long tradition to support, to show short films, student films from Georgia, from Armenia, from Azerbaijan, from also Central Asia, from Tajikistan, etc., from Turkey, showing all the first film by Noébi Göcelen is a Premier Plan of Angers Festival, which takes place in January. You know, for me, if you have a short film selected in the student section of Angers, it's really good thing. It's a really good thing. What other places? I mean, yeah, I think that's the one I have in mind right now. Any tools, it depends who you are and where you are with your career. To be honest, I would never pay directly for Cinando. For me, it's very useful, but for something basic, which is to get emails and phone numbers of people that I know that they will be more accurate and more updated, and they will actually give them, and not on the, I can never find it on a website. So sometimes when I miss an email of someone, I would do this. It happened to me a couple of times to watch a film on Cinendo, but for me, it's not better or worse than Vimeo or YouTube, but it's not
basically like Facebook for the film industry in one way or another.
For me, I use Facebook to. I don't need to go to Cinendo to do that. For me, it's great as a database. It's good for online screenings, but many sales agents have their own platforms. So basically, I use it, but it's not a must. I didn't know much about animation, but in the last 2 years, I've been involved as an advisor for CE animation. And I would, even though I mentioned it already, I would like to talk more in details, because basically, this is a platform of association of animation filmmakers from all over Central and Eastern Europe. And it is born of acknowledgement that animators from Central and Eastern Europe, they don't know each other enough. And it's the same kind of process that what happened with fiction films 10 years before or 15 years before, is that they basically want to have their project in the forums in Western Europe. They want to co-produce with Western Europe, but it's not suitable for all of the project. Many co-production between Western Europe and Eastern Europe are unbalanced, because the value of is not the same. So basically, you have a minority co-producers who provide 30% of the budget, but actually it represents less than 10% of the work. Mm-hmm. So it's not very healthy co-production. And with animation, even more than fiction films, it's much more likely and easy to divide the task of animation making between different countries. You don't have the main shooting location, and you have less the limit of 2 or 3 countries. So basically, I do believe that Azeri animators would gain a lot to join the network of CE animation, which is made of several activities. One is a forum, annual forum, that last year I moderated with 30 projects, 10 shorts, 10 series, 10 feature films. One is a program which highlights talents and a program that circulates. And one is a workshop that is open to producers and directors to develop short and series and features. So I know that last year there was a participant from Georgia. I don't think there were participants from Azerbaijan, but definitely they should look for it, because everybody knows about basically 2 places, all the activities of Cartoon Forum, the Cartoon Digital, Cartoon TV, Cartoon Forum, and the other one I forgot. And they are very much into economic realities, which doesn't really correspond to the needs of Eastern Europe. And the other one is ANSI. That's why it was created. So I don't know who asked the question, but I would really encourage them to not only apply to a specific project, but to get in touch with this platform to know if association of Azeri animation filmmaker could join the network. A producer is a partner in all sense for a film to happen. So of course a producer is involved into fundraising, not financing, because I know very few producers who invest their own money, but into fundraising to make a film happen. But usually a producer is a person who has extensive experience and who can also advise. Each producer has his or her own specialties. Some are good at supporting with the development phase. Some are good with looking for the right collaborators, cinematographers or actors. Some are good at the editing stage. So definitely for me, I like to see the creative team because it gives me trust into a film. Some people, for example, would never take in a lab a director producer. I'm not so strict about that, but it does have a point, because at some point of the film, depending on the ambition of the film, a director producer could lose the sight or be overwhelmed. A co-producer also give you access to some visibility, access to, because of his or her own networking, it can help to facilitate the process to some funds, to some festivals. So there are many advantages. But the negative side, as I mentioned, is the unbalance. How much something costs in Azerbaijan and how much it costs in some other places. If it's added value, if, for example, there's a colorist or sound designer that definitely you will not find in Azerbaijan, it makes sense. If it's to make the same thing as you could make in Azerbaijan 10 times more expensive in another place, for me, it doesn't make sense. I like this question because I've been a film critic myself for many years. I stopped, but and I also organize workshops for film critics called NISI MASA, and I guess some of them still exist. But what I know, a program that I attended myself in Rotterdam, is every year they take between 3 and 5 or 6 film critics to participate in the festival and to write in English in the daily of the festival. I think the call is usually in September, October, and the festival is in January. I also know of the program of Warsaw Film Festival in cooperation with S1E3, that they take a couple of film critics. So unfortunately, there are not as many as for scriptwriters, but they do exist. I also recommend to look at the website of the FIPRESI, the International Federation of Critics, and to get in touch with them. You know, it's a organization that really is in need to have younger people involved. So I think they would very welcome, if I would be in the FIPRESI, I would welcome an email to say, look, I am 18 and I'm a film critic. How can you help me?
Great. And finally, this is a question that keeps popping up constantly. So I assume this would be a great question to sort of end our today's masterclass.
You know, for me, it's a constant process to get yourself informed and to exchange and to confront what you believe with the reality and what are the realities. You know, even as an advisor for San Sebastian Film Festival, working 10 years with and for them, I really had a hard time to even have a grasp sometimes of what they like and what they didn't like, because the committee and the committees are made of different individualities with different priorities. So I think I do have my opinions. I do believe that programmers, for many reasons, favor some kind of films because of their demographics, the social fabrics of the programmers. For example, you don't have many parents, you don't have many mothers in programmers, because usually you have single people and you have many men, and it does have influence on many things. But fortunately, you know, for me, it's not a big deal because there are so many festivals. It's really a big deal that when we talk about monopolization and uniformization of taste, there's a reduced number and all American ones that define the taste of, all the platforms are Americans. And even though inside these platforms, we have people from different nationalities, it's basically Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Disney Plus. And this is a big problem. The problem of festivals is less of a problem because I don't like this idea of stay true to your inner voice, but I do believe that there are enough. I've never seen I've seen sometimes very good films that had a hard time to start off, but I have never seen a good film that completely ignore. For example, I can share this because it's already old, it's already 7 years. I was working for San Sebastian and we had the opportunity to select Paweł Pawlikowski, ildę. And my colleagues, and I'm the good cop here because I love the film and I push for it. My colleagues, for some reason, didn't take it. And it was a repeated mistake because I think it's a mistake. No matter your take on your film, it's an exceptional film. Cannes made the mistake, Venice made the mistake, San Sebastian made the mistake. But at the end of the day, it went to Toronto and London and it made a splash. And it was discovered. So programmers don't like to tell such stories because it put less of absolute power in their hands. But I think it's true. But I do believe that it's much more an issue for a filmmaker if you have only one way to finance your film because you have only one Ministry of Culture. Or you have only one platform, which is Netflix. This is a problem, but don't really think about does my film have a chance because it's pro-Soviet times. I've seen this question, or anti-Soviet times, or pro. Doesn't matter, I wish you best of luck with continuation of the lab.
Представляют, например, на какой-то вечеринке человеку и
там работы с Пафнутием, с Мишей, общий язык, который является уже